All right, Mr. Jack Carr, thank you so much for being on the Wolf and Iron podcast. I'm excited, man. I think this is going to be a great conversation. Glad to have you here.
Yeah, and I'm fired up to be here. And I got to say that I don't often get jealous of other people's beards. But in this case, that thing is solid. I love it.
Oh man, I really do appreciate that. I do. I was telling my wife the other day, I shaved my head because I started balding. I was like, I'm just gonna preemptive strike on this thing, but I noticed that I had some really cool gray hairs coming in. I thought if I had a full head of hair, I could have had like the cool like gray side stuff happening,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I totally missed out on that. I went a little bit too soon, and but there's always things that we wish we could do differently or what have you.
There
So
you go. You got a tiny bit. It's working on the beard though. It's,
yeah,
what I
yeah,
found is that mine, like, so you have like a little light one right there, like a little
yep,
almost blonde right there.
yep,
That's what I found started to go gray first. Like I had this blonde, it was all like in Afghanistan and stuff. It was all dark except for
yep.
this like little blonde piece right there. It was really strange. And then that's what actually started to go gray first was the ones that used to come in. And it's not really a blonde, but like a reddish gold
Yeah,
almost.
yeah.
Anyway.
I had the same thing, and I thought I was going to have a season with a red beard, and then like literally the next year it was just like, oh no, we're gray now.
And
So
there we are. Beer Talk Radio right
yeah,
now.
beer talk. Here we go. All right, so Jack Carr, we're not talking about beards. We're talking about all kinds of other stuff. I thought I'd bounce around a little bit on some topics here because you got a lot of stuff going on. As you know, sometimes there's authors that we follow because we like their books and we just kind of want to see what they're up to and kind of what they're into. But you've got so many things that are just interesting. Like you're having what seems to be a ridiculous amount of fun. And so and I may be totally not right about that, but you've got the Terminal List, which is being made into a series now from your first book that's starring Chris Pratt. You got the new book out, the Devil's Hand, which is great. I'm on about chapter 10 of that. That's book 4 for you in the James Reese series. You're a host of the Danger Close podcast, and you're doing all kinds of cool things with Black Rifle Coffee. We all see that kind of stuff. What's it like right now? Just your life, being you, doing what you do. What is that? Just kind of give us an idea of like what's it like to be Jack Carr.
It's busy right now, like which
Yeah.
is it's a good thing. I'm not very good at the balance side of it. Like in the military, it was always about that pendulum being on the side of the team because that's what you owed. That's what you owe the guys you're taking down range. That's what you owed their families, the mission, the country. And for me and my wife, like we talk about that, and she knew that hey, this is the time for the pendulum to be over there. So everything that I did was all about making me a better operator, a better combat leader. Everything that I read, all my workouts, like everything was focused on that end, building trust with the guys, both up and down the chain of command. So all of it was just on that end goal of leaving the gate at a forward operating base, heading towards a target, and being able to make the best decisions possible for those guys that trusted me. So when I'm out now, I continue to do this full-on sprint because I recognized that things were a little different than I initially thought they would be as an author. And I thought as an author that you just, because as growing up in the 80s, you just have this vision of an author
Write a
just
book.
writing kind of alone and
Yeah.
like in a cabin in the mountains is how I envisioned it. And so we moved to the mountains. And I thought you just wrote a book and sent it to New York and they published it. And then you started your next one. I didn't realize that it was also a business. And I realized that I think in the lead up to that first one. So as I crept closer and closer to that first publication date in 2018, I had an Instagram account that I was just kind of looking. I was just monitoring, kind of looking. It wasn't my official one. I just had like a fake one where I was just kind of like, what is this Instagram thing? What is
Yeah.
this social media thing? Because I had no background in that in the SEAL teams, no idea about marketing or anything like that. I had no interest in social media. I thought only bad things could come from it if you were using social media in the military, which is now different. Now it's different. Now the paradigm has shifted in that now if you don't have a social media background and an online presence, now you're the red flag if you're
Yep.
doing something kind of in the darker side of special operations. But that's beside the point. Point being, I had no idea about these social channels, never wanted anything to do with social channels.
Yep.
But then I realized that, okay, this is a business. And because it's publishing houses, even big ones like Simon & Schuster, they only have a limited amount of assets to allocate, bandwidth to allocate, and they have thousands of authors. And they invested in me. They took a risk on me. So I thought, okay, they gave me my shot. They took a risk on me. My family is taking a risk with me going down this path. I owe everyone my full effort, which means that the product has to be the best it can be, but also people have to know that it exists, and you have to do the business side of the house, just like if you're starting a coffee shop somewhere. You have to do that budget, you have to do that advertising, that marketing, that social media, that engagement. You have to build that brand, so that people know that you exist. They check out your product. If they like it, they tell a friend about it, and then you can do what you love, which is right. So it's busy, I guess, is the best way to describe what it's like right now. Because just like on the battlefield, I'm constantly adapting to a changing landscape. And growing up and seeing the authors that I loved, how they would have an interview and then they'd go away for like a year, maybe a year and a half, maybe 2 years. You didn't know when the next book was coming out because you couldn't just Google it. So I recognize, just much like on the battlefield, the enemy's always adapting. You're always adapting. You're looking for gaps in the enemy's defenses. You're looking to capitalize on momentum. And that's the same thing I do when I write, to solve problems, aggressively solve problems on the page, just like on the battlefield. But it's also that adapting on the business side, like looking at, hey, what was not available to these authors in 1965, 75, 85, 95? What couldn't the guys that I read, like Tom Clancy and Nelson DeMille and A.J. Quinnell and J.C. Pollock and Mark Olden, David Morrell, Stephen Hunter, what could these guys not do back then that we can do today to build a readership, to engage, and in my case, to thank people for taking a risk on me as a new author, because people only have a certain amount of time, and that's the most valuable asset. And they're trusting me with that time, whether it's reading a social post or a blog article or listening to an interview, listening to this podcast, or spending time in the pages of the book, or listening to the book on audio, which is like 10, 11, 12, 13 hours, depending on which one people pick up or download. So it's a lot of, I guess, a lot of time, energy, and effort goes in to figuring out how to be as thoughtful as I can be in engaging with people, because they are trusting me with that time, while at the same time building that readership, which allows me to write. So that was a very, very long way of telling you that things are busy these days, and they're even busier around launch week, because launch week, or launch 2 weeks or 3 weeks, actually, it seems like in this case, is just a go all day, every day sprints. And people think that the publisher is doing a lot of this stuff, like sending books out to people and all that, and they do, but if you'd see our front room right now, it's full of just boxes and printing labels and like all sorts of craziness out there. So it's a busy time. And I'm all in.
I think that's a solid advice, because that really sets a good frame for authors that are, even the guys that have maybe they're 1 or 2 books in, to whatever. It's like, you've got to carry that weight of marketing and of being your best ambassador. Even someone who's had a number of successful books like you have, and you've got some, publisher backing that's kind of helping you out. You've still got to be, running that show. And if you can't do it, you've got to get somebody else in there who can, because it's that important. If you want to succeed as an author, it's not just you write a book and it just organically explodes anymore. It is easier to write a book, and that means that there's a lot more competition out there. And there are people who are willing. There are people actually who are not as good of writers, but they're really good at marketing, and they're really good at the business side, or they've got their ducks in a row on that side, that are actually going to outpace the people who are actually better at communicating stories and communicating messages. And so I think that's what you've just said is makes it very clear for people who are just, they're kind of stuck in that old model way of thinking, and it just doesn't work that way anymore.
Yeah, definitely a shifting landscape right now. Obviously, not just in publishing, because I look at a lot of industries outside of publishing. Really, what I got from publishing was that they've been so successful for so long, and publishing houses have been such a important part of American culture for so long. But that also means that they might not recognize some of the opportunities that are out there in the new media type space, or if they recognize them, once again, you only have a certain amount of bandwidth to allocate. And if you're looking at ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, Fox, daytime talk shows, that sort of thing, then there are some other people out there, that you can engage with to help raise awareness about what you're doing. And that's not just in publishing. That's in any business out there. And I love just the coffee shop analogy, because I boil it down to that. If I want to start something and I want people to come in the front door of that store and check it out, maybe get a cup of coffee, maybe buy a bag of coffee if I'm roasting it. There are ways for me to get out there and do that, rather than hiring a gigantic advertising agency and then having them go through their traditional routes of who they've engaged with in the past and putting a print ad in X newspaper or Y magazine or whatever it might be. There's other things you can do if you take ownership of that process. So I recognize that right off the bat. And plus, you know, the publishing industry is kind of like movies. You know, the Avengers pays for everybody else.
Yeah.
They pay for all the movies that don't make their money back, and typically books don't make their money back. I mean, mine did, but that's, you know, the outlier, especially for a new author. But knowing that, that also means that, hey, those people like Stephen King and John Grisham that have been around for a long time and crush it every time they publish anything. Well, the publisher needs to capitalize on that continued momentum so they can continue to pay for all those other books that don't make their money back. So I realized like those guys are going to get the lion's share of the assets and attention from the publisher. So I'm going to have to take ownership of this and do whatever I can to crush it on my own. And then the publisher will see some of that momentum, and then maybe slowly I'll get some of that other that their bandwidth or the assets to allocate towards me as a new author. So really, I just wanted to prove myself that I was a good investment to them. So I continue to be in this full on sprint today, and it's not just looking at publishing. I looked at a lot of industries outside of publishing and took some lessons from them, like why is it so different to get my iPhone than it was to get my BlackBerry back in the day? You know, it's an experience. They put as much work into that packaging as they did into the product inside, and there's a reason for that. Like, how does Red Bull launch a new drink? They don't just put it on the shelf and not tell anyone, or just do one post. No, there's a coordinated campaign to launch these things that leverage all of their assets and their relationships, personal and professional. So you couldn't have done that 30 years ago. You can today. So I took some of those lessons across industry and then just applied them to what I was doing.
And you sound like a seasoned entrepreneur as you're talking about this stuff, because I know it goes along with it. But do you, is there a side of you that really enjoys the entrepreneurial aspects of it and kind of geeks out on it? Like, wow, this is cool. I get a chance to do this. Or are you like, if I could just be in that cabin and write, I'd rather do that instead?
I think I'd rather just be in the cabin and write, but I realize that you can't. So I'm not going to sit around wishing that's the case, because that's not going to get me there. It's not going to change anything. In fact, it's going to hurt. But I definitely look at this as an entrepreneurial venture for sure. And what I do love is learning new things. And so I look at it like that, like, hey, I'm learning new things here. I'm helping other people along the way. A lot of veteran-owned companies, a lot of people that I know from military service. They're out there making knives, or they're gunsmiths, or coffee company, or whatever it might be. We get to help each other. Which is very, very cool. And so I love doing that. So I do love learning new things. I love looking at this landscape and adapting and figuring out how to best leverage these new platforms that are available today that weren't available 30 years ago. And then figuring out how to expand the readership by doing that, because that allows me to then do the writing. So they're very closely intertwined. And will they be that way forever? Probably.
Yeah,
I would guess. But yeah, this is definitely a garage startup is how I look at it. And now I'm at that stage, and my wife would be like, well, finally, because she's out there like stuffing T-shirts and hats like this in these boxes, and like she's printing labels and like doing all that stuff. And so finally, this year, I think it's like the time from being that garage startup to like move into an office space somewhere where now you have some processes in place. So we're gonna try to outsource the merchandise side of the house. I was trying to do a podcast for like a year, and I recorded episodes and all this stuff. I figured out how to use this Roadcast mat, whatever the thing is, and all that, and then couldn't like upload and figure out like all these different passwords and platforms. I was like, okay, so it's important, like just like with with carrying a pistol, like it's important to know your capabilities but also your limitations. So I am limited in this sense of what I can do on the technical side. So now I have Ironclad Media that I record these podcasts, they upload them, they do whatever they need to do to put them out on YouTube and Spotify and Apple and all that stuff. So yeah, Danger Close, Beyond the Books with Jack Carr, I get to talk to his friends, and it's just an excuse to kind of catch up with people, really. But yeah, they drop every Wednesday. But point being, couldn't have done that 30 years ago, and then I had a limitation on figuring out how to do that, so it was taking a lot of time just trying to figure that out. So that's outsourced. So right now is the time to kind of move into that stage where I put these different processes in place and have essentially these different verticals, so that I can be more organized, more disciplined in my approach, and have more time to write.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. We started our other business, Rustic in Maine, 5 years ago, actually this month. And it was me and my garage just starting up, and now we've got about 40 people that work with us.
No
And
way.
yeah,
That's
so
awesome.
it's a big thing. And so it all starts with that recognition of there's some things that I probably could do, but it'd be better if somebody else took this on. And it's just that mindset that just continues to roll along and helps that business grow. And I think
That's
it's
fantastic.
exciting.
I'm going to check all that out. I can't wait to check all that out. I love that sort of thing. I love when people start up something they're passionate about in their garage and then
Yeah.
figure out a way to grow it. And I think that's fantastic. I can't wait to check this out.
Oh, yeah, appreciate that. So let's talk a little bit about The Devil's Hand. I got the book
Yeah.
here, and I just wanted to call out this good-looking guy on the
Yeah.
back.
Yeah.
Took up the whole back cover. No need to promote the book or anything. It's just I thought that was cool because in writing books, a lot of times you're like, well, here's what the book's about, and you're kind of giving the spiel, and you're like, no, just an awesome picture of me.
Well,
I thought it was great.
so when I took that one, the publisher was like, I had a beard and it was really big then.
Yeah,
And the publisher was like, hey, when you go on book tour, are you going to have the beard? And I was like thinking, I didn't know. And I was like, well, I guess not. I guess I'd probably, shave and maybe dress up and I guess. And they're like, okay, well then take your author photo without your beard. So I shaved, took the author photo, and then things are so busy. I mean, the whole point for me of having a beard
yeah. You just
is
don't have
that it saves time. Like I do nothing. People keep asking me, what do you put in your beard? I get that question a lot. Nothing, zero. The whole point is that I don't have to do anything. I can throw on a hat and don't have to shave, and that's the whole point. So that quickly became what happened. Is I got so busy, still in this full-on sprint, and that was 2018. That now the publisher's like, okay, obviously you're not going to shave. Why don't we take another picture? And then I did in the fall,
Yeah.
and I've been so busy, I haven't had a chance to even go through them, so I missed my deadline to get it on the cover of the new book. And my buddy took the picture down the street. Awesome guy, Mike Stoner, who does all these crazy outdoor photography type stuff. And so we took one, and I haven't even had a chance to pick it and send it to Simon and Schuster to see what they think. So that'll hopefully in time for the next book, in time
There
for
you go.
book
They'll be
5.
like, who's this guy?
Yeah.
He's a tougher Jack Carr.
Finally did it. Yeah.
So in The Devil's Hand, we're not going to get into too many spoilers here because I'm only on chapter 10 and I don't want to spoil it for myself. But one of the things that I realized about your books is that because they're written in kind of like a reality that's very close to our own, using a lot of common, things that are happening in society. This one references 9/11, which is still pretty fresh for a lot of us. And even though it was, over 20 years ago now, it's just, or so, it's just crazy to think about. But when you're writing these books, and you're kind of working with subjects that are not fictional, but you're introducing your own world there. How do you find that line to where you're like, okay, this is going to hit close to home, and that's what I want, versus I'm utilizing this to kind of spin a story and maybe even taking away from something that really happened that was serious. In your mind, and as you're kind of plotting out these stories, how does that occur to you, or how are you thinking through that?
Yeah, it just comes naturally. For this one, I outlined this in August of 2019. So I was flying to and from Russia. I was doing research for Savage Son, my third novel, and I realized that I needed to leave my computer behind and my phone behind because who knows what emails people have sent me over the years or what's on these computers, really. So I didn't want Russian intelligence sucking a bunch of stuff out as I walked through customs or confiscating them or whatever. So I brought a sat phone and I brought a notebook. And I outlined the whole novel to and from Russia. I got back. I took what I learned from being in just south of Siberia and Kamchatka Peninsula, wove that into my last novel, Savage Son, and then I started to outline The Devil's Hand. And the catalyst and really the basis for this was something I thought about a lot while I was in uniform in the SEAL teams, and what I continue to think about today as an author and a citizen, which is what does the enemy learn by watching us on the field of battle for the last 20 years at war? So that became the foundation. Like, what if if I was Russia, if I was China, if I was North Korea, if I was Iran, if I was a super empowered individual or a terrorist organization, and I had this 20 years to watch the United States in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Syria, a couple other hotspots around the world. What would I have learned and what would I have applied then to future battle plans? So that formed the foundation, that formed the basis for the novel. And then I used a bioweapon as the catalyst that drives that plot forward. And I didn't know anything about bioweapons, didn't really know much about infectious diseases or the weaponization of infectious diseases other than what I read in Richard Preston's The Hot Zone back in the 90s. So I got deep into research, be deep into academic research, into journals and articles and books and interviews with people that had some sort of a touch point with infectious diseases and bioweapons. And then, of course, COVID hits. And because I'm already so deep into this plot, and also because, more importantly, not just the bioweapon part, but most importantly is what the foundation of the novel is, which is what the enemy is learning from us by watching us. Well, they're learning about something about our response to COVID, and then a summer of civil unrest, which actually continues today. They're learning something from that. Very contentious political season and election cycle. They're learning things from that. So they're always looking, they're always watching, they're always adapting. And so it became very natural for me to incorporate those events into the novel, because it would have been disingenuous not to, because the enemy is learning. And I had spent at this point, now in October, November of 2020, I spent a year in the enemy's shoes, over a year in the enemy's shoes, writing about this. And I actually ran into a bit of a problem. And that problem was, wow, I've spent all this time in the enemy's shoes looking at us, looking at the United States. And if I was the enemy, I would probably just sit back and watch, because we're doing a pretty good job of tearing ourselves apart from the inside all on our own. So I had to come up with something, and I won't tell you because you're not there yet. I had to come up with a little something to make it necessary for the enemy to strike now. But in 2019, in August of 2019, when I started outlining this novel, I didn't know, obviously, that 2020 was going to be such a pivotal year in the history of our nation and the world in general. But it happened to be. And so it was very natural to incorporate all those elements into the storyline.
There's something that you mentioned in the book, and I think we've all heard it, and that is our enemies are playing the long game. You know, like you said, they're watching us for years after years after year. And there's something that's different about how they think and process life in the world than we do. Because I don't know if it's America's a forgiving nation or if we're just opportunistic or whatever the case is. You know, you think about how quickly we forgave the Japanese after World War II, you know, and you know, we nuked them and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, like they had interned our people and had, you know, eaten some of our people. It's just crazy stuff that were going on. But at the same time, we were like, you know, let's let bygones be bygones. America seems to, or at least Americans seem to have the ability to move on to the next chapter of whatever that is for American life. Not always good, but that's where we are. How is it that do you think that our enemies, how do they stay focused for so long on a particular goal, like destroying America or taking down the great Satan and those kinds of things? What is it about them that causes that kind of mindset?
Yeah, I think we think in terms of 4-year election cycles, maybe for the really deep thinkers, 8 years, but we're stuck in this 4-year election cycle mindset. Whereas they, in those other countries that you mentioned, a lot of them can have either a group in power or a single person in power for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. Plus, they have a much longer history than we do in the United States. Our history in the United States only dates back a certain amount of time. Some of those countries date back, eons. So it's more culturally natural for them to play that long game for a host of reasons there. And yeah, that is beneficial to them, because they can do that, and we seem incapable of doing that. It's harder for us to learn lessons from the past, because we're applying something for now, even worse, towards the next tweet, which is even worse than towards the next election cycle. So yeah, it's not advantageous to us to just continue to think in these 4 or 8 year terms. It's very limiting. So they don't have that limit in those other countries that you mentioned. They can take a breath. They can play the long game, and all our cards are on the table for the most part. Like they've watched us play poker for the last 20 years in Iraq and Afghanistan. They've looked at our cards, see how we play those cards, so they can apply those lessons into their future battle plans. We're trying to study them. You know, obviously we have a robust intelligence network whose job it is to do that sorts of thing, to anticipate the enemy's next move, but we're not as good at that as they are, because once again they're not showing us all their cards, and we tend to do that. So there's definitely some challenges that we face that they don't.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good point, especially about the election cycles and how we tend to think and move along that time frame. That makes sense. Shifting a little bit here. So you're a former Navy SEAL. And this kind of ties in a little bit about what our enemies have learned. I was thinking about this before talking to you. I'm actually former Navy as well, and we used to. You guys were the guys that we just we didn't talk to you guys because I was just an enlisted E nothing,
What did you
and
do?
I was an aviation electrician's mate, whose job got outsourced not long after I got on the USS Enterprise.
Oh
So
wow.
it was a lot of just getting passed around from from group to group because it was like we need something for Yarborough to do because
Oh
his
wow.
yeah. But anyhow, but we would talk about you guys. We would talk about the SEALs. What you guys did when we saw you in training and different things like that, or stories that we heard. And I always wondered, like, what do our enemies have to have stories about you guys as well? I don't know what they would be. I just thought that would be interesting to think because, like, there's got to be, there's probably some stories about the SEALs that are true, but then there's probably these larger than life kind of like, what the SEALs came in and did, and they took out, 400 of us, or something like that. I don't know. I just thought I would just throw that out there. I don't know if you have any, or if you've ever heard of anything from their perspective of like what they think about you guys, and and how that would work. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, no, interesting. So yeah, remember in Band of Brothers, remember the character that lets people think that he actually gunned down
Oh,
these German soldiers. It's classic. It's probably my favorite part of Band of Brothers, which is I think the best. I mean, even though it's a
yes,
miniseries, it's the best war movie
yeah,
ever made. It's incredible. But so similar to that, yeah, in Vietnam, so we were called the men with green faces, and so the enemy knew that there were these guys out there that would just spring out of the jungle. The jungle would erupt, and then they'd melt back into it and get out of there. So we became very good at those hit and run, direct action type missions, particularly ambushes in the Mekong Delta. And then the SEAL teams really lived on that reputation from the end of Vietnam up to September 11th. There are flashpoints here
yep,
and there with Grenada and Panama and Mogadishu, a little bit in Desert One, but for the most part, we had not been in sustained combat. Actually, not for the most part, we had not been in sustained combat operations since the end of Vietnam. So we lived on that reputation essentially. Those guys were incredible. The Vietnam era SEALs were just, I mean, it was a watershed moment in special operations history. Then we get to September 11th, and it's time to go to work again.
yeah,
And there was, gosh, I'm trying to remember what it was, but we were like not the men with the Velcro, but there was something about the Velcro because had different uniforms than the
yeah,
rest of the military. So we go over there just we were plain tan at the beginning, and then of course we got the Cry Pro type stuff, and so there was just always a little something different about our gear and our uniforms than the rest of the military, and the enemy notices. It's not like
yeah,
they just
sure, yeah,
don't notice. They're like the guys with the beards and the guys with the Velcro patches. There was something, and I can't remember the exact. I think there was an exact term for it that I can't remember right now. It's probably online somewhere, but yeah, it was like the men with the Velcro patches or something along those
yeah,
lines. Men with the beards. So that there was something about that. So when they saw you, they knew you meant business type
yeah.
deal.
I love
Uh,
that. I think that's awesome. I mean, I think that's from our perspective, obviously. The enemy just seeing you guys roll up on something and going, "Oh crap, we're
mhm.
this is not going to be good for us." Um,
Yeah.
yeah, no, I think that's great. You were a reader early on in life, and I mean, an avid reader of thriller and fictions and things like that. When you went into the SEALs and you became a SEAL, did you see yourself as there's a thing that writers can do sometimes where we kind of objectify reality, or we put ourselves in a story, or we see ourselves as part of a story. Did you see yourself as kind of playing a character in a sense? And if not, that's fine. But I just kind of wanted to see your thoughts of having an awareness of stories and of heroes and here, and the hero's journey and those kinds of things. Did you see that as a SEAL for yourself? And if so, how did that shape how you kind of went through the process?
Yeah, not consciously, other than just knowing that we're all on a journey, and having that close connection to Joseph Campbell here with A Thousand Faces,
Hmm.
having done all this reading, both on the thriller side of the house, but then also just studying warfare and terrorism and insurgencies and counterinsurgencies. All that was part of my journey, making me who I am. Studying everything that happened as it was real time, like so seeing Newsweek and Time show up at our house and have TWA 847 hijacking on the cover, or Marine barracks bombing on the cover of the newspaper, or whatever it was. Even before that, seeing Walter Cronkite count down the days that U.S. citizens have been held hostage in Iran. So all these things, I wasn't just like, oh, okay. I thought about it. I studied
Sure.
it. They were impactful. And and any book that came out. My mom was a librarian, so I grew up with this love of reading and books. So anything on warfare and terrorism in particular, counterinsurgencies, I was all into that. Insurgencies, I was studying Vietnam, and then just I was always reading that sort of thing. But that was part of my journey. So I don't think in a conscious sense that I saw myself as a character, other than to recognize that we're all on this journey and our decisions impact, what we impact us on our path, and those around us on our path as well. So that was probably so not in a sense that I was like, oh, I'm a character in this, in my own story or anything like that. No, it's just like that was just an innate understanding that we're all on this journey. And then as I got out, of course, then all those things came together. All that reading I'd done really gave me an early education in the art of storytelling. All that academic study of warfare that started well before the military continued through the military, continues today. And then that experience on the battlefield in Iraq and Afghanistan, all that gets woven and intertwined into the plots of my novels, more so on how the characters feel about certain things. So I take the emotions and feelings behind certain real world events and apply those to a completely fictional narrative, which makes this kind of read and resonate as authentic, because those feelings are real. So yeah, I think it's an awareness that we're all on a journey, because we all are. I mean, we only got one ride on this planet, so you get to decide, if you're just going to sit there and spin around, or if you're going to go after what you want in life. You're going to go after those experiences that you want, and hopefully give other people a helping hand along the way, and be a positive influence to those around you as you move forward. So I think that was more the thought process, rather than I'm a character in my own story type thing.
Yeah, no, that's good, because I mean, you've lived a life, and you're still living a life that is very much it's that of a hero, and it's that of somebody who's on a particularly unique journey, which makes you very interesting. And so that's why I thought maybe that's there'd be some kind of connection there, but that's totally fine. I wanted to jump into another question about James Reese. So I told you I was going to bounce around. These are my transitioning skills that I'm so good at.
There you go. Good. Keep you on your toes. It's good stuff.
That's right. When did James Reese first become a thought, like this idea of, okay, I've got this hero. Here's who he is. This is the kind of the journey he's going to be taking. Was that after you got out, were you just kind of thinking through this? Does it harken back to any ideas that you had, like as a young man, of like, oh, if I were going to write a book, this is maybe how it would go? How did that develop?
Oh yeah, so I've been developing James Reese and these storylines since I was about 10 years old, I would guess. I wanted to be a SEAL since I was 7.
Yeah.
Started reading the things my parents were reading about age 10. That's when Hunt for Red October came out. And that's when I found David Morrell with Rambo First Blood Part 2, and then Brotherhood of the Rose, and Fraternity of the Stone, League of Night and Fog, First Blood, of course, which he wrote in 1972 and has never been out of print. So I read these characters resonated with me because they had backgrounds that I wanted in real life one day. So from all those authors writing back then, typically their protagonist, their main character, had a background in Vietnam, had experience in Vietnam, either as a SEAL or Army Special Forces or Marine sniper or something along those, CIA operative, something along those lines, like Phoenix Project, all that sort of thing, Phoenix Program. So I knew back then, I was reading these things, I knew that I was going to write one day the same type of thrillers that I was enjoying reading even back then. So in my mind, it's very natural for me to think about, hey, what's my character going to be like? What on these stories that I'm reading right now, what's resonating with me? Maybe even what's not resonating with me? How do I apply the hero's journey to this? After I found out about Joseph Campbell, and there were a series of interviews he did with Bill Moyers on PBS in 1988 called The Power of Myth. My mom and I watched that together, and I was enthralled with it because, of course, The Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell influenced George Lucas for Star Wars. So, I had a touch point there. And I mean, it was fascinating. So I think I just kind of naturally applied that to what I was reading, movies I'd watched, television shows, and I was able to process, hey, what worked, what didn't, why this resonated, why this didn't, did this follow the hero's journey, did it not, that sort of thing. So, I mean, First Blood's an incredible example of following Joseph Campbell's journey, the hero's journey. That is first blood. And if you look back at a lot of the things that have resonated over time, yeah, you have a reluctant hero, whether it's a book or a movie. He meets a mentor along the way. Think
Yep.
Star Wars, think
Yep.
Obi-Wan Kenobi or Yoda. That gives a piece of knowledge or even a tool to that hero along the way. Think lightsaber, think
Yep.
piece of knowledge, and then that hero is tested and faces some sort of a crucible, and then emerges transformed on the other side of it. Typically, they're going to a cave and emerge transformed. If you go back to the earliest of days, and then they bring the lessons back to their people, so to from where they came. So a lot of these things are passing down lessons, and most of them are connected to warfare and are connected to hunting from those or the early oral tradition of storytelling. So yeah, I started thinking about this well before I got out of the military. So from age 10 on, I was thinking about this sort of thing and developing this future character. And my third novel, Savage Son, is a book I wanted to write since the sixth grade, since I read Most Dangerous Game, which is a short story by Richard Connell from 1924. And even back then, I knew that one day I'd write a modern day thriller that paid tribute to that short story. And I wanted to start with that one. I wanted that to be the first novel, but I knew that the characters weren't developed enough to explore those themes of Savage Son, the dark side of man through the dynamic of hunter and hunted. So I had to wait. I had to introduce James Reese to readers through the Terminal List, which they're filming right now in LA, which is crazy, with Chris Pratt starring and Antoine Fuqua directing.
Yep.
Incredible. And then still at the end of that, not ready. He needed to go on a journey of redemption, had to learn how to live again, transition, find his next mission in life. And then after that one, then I was like, okay, it's time for Savage Son. This is the one I've wanted to write. The characters are at a place now where I can explore these themes, and it was time to write Savage Son. And all these books, I was very cognizant the fact that I didn't want to have the same story recycled and just choose a different setting and change
Yeah.
some names, and like just because it worked with the first one or worked with the second or whatever it was, I'd like to just pick that up and like, oh, I'm dropping it in Africa now. Oh, I'm dropping it in Europe now. Oh, I'm dropping it in China. So
Yeah.
we're
Vital.
all on this journey. We're all on this, and people are gonna get knocked down in life regardless. They're gonna have to get up and keep moving forward. The way you do that is of vital importance. But we're all on this journey. We're all gonna get hit, and that's why I wanted my characters to continue to develop, not just be the exact same character in each book, although it's the same person, but they're on a journey just like we all are. Hopefully, we're all on this journey of self-discovery. We all want to make ourselves better. We're all questioning things. So do these characters. And so I want each of these books to continue to develop these characters over time, not just have them be, okay, here's my character, here's his hair color, his eye color, here's his attributes, and boom, here's the new situation. No, it's all this journey, and they're continuing to build on one another, just like all our experiences in life build on this foundation, whatever it is. Even if they're failures, you're learning from them and moving forward, hopefully applying that knowledge as wisdom as you move forward. But that's how I want my characters to be too. They're continuing to develop because they're all on journeys just like we all are.
And I think it's so good because you touched on something there where you began developing a lot of this stuff as a kid, right? And it's awesome to think that something that you thought about when you were 10 years old, you're executing on now. And I want to say this to the people who are watching or the people who are listening. There's probably something that you've got that you've been sitting on and contemplating for most of your life, and you got to take that chance to say, oh, and it's actually, you have an advantage now because you've been thinking about it for 2, 3, 4 decades, whatever it happens to be. Don't just keep it as a dream or as an idea, but actually execute on that thing, make it happen, make it a reality. That's something that people who have dreams or have visions of these characters or the worlds they've built. There's a lot more of them than the people who have actually brought those things to life, because there's a type of discipline that it takes to actually bring that stuff to life and to make those things a reality. And I think there's something that an artist experiences when they share their art with other people, that a writer experiences when they share their written work with other people, that it's hard to explain, but it's when somebody else sees your vision, sees your dream, sees your book, that you've been thinking about since you were, a kid in some kind of way, or sees your characters you've been thinking about. That's an incredible experience, I imagine, for you. To have people say, "Oh, James Reese, he's awesome. I love that book. I've read all of them." That's got to be just such a great, like, yes, like I was right this whole time. It is awesome. I knew it.
Yeah, yeah. No, it really is. It's surreal in many respects. I really haven't taken Probably enough time to take a breath and think about it or dwell on it, just because I'm always in this full on sprint right now, building this foundation so I can
Sure.
continue to write. So I get asked a lot about, hey, what is it like to make the New York Times list, or what is it like to see Chris Pratt playing your character
Yeah.
and whatever. And I haven't really taken the time to think about that, or because I got something else to do. Like I got a fifth book to write. I got a podcast to do. I got an interview to do. I got, there's ways that I can continue to reach out to people. And I love to, on social media, thank everybody. Getting harder and harder to do now with people that reach out. But I sincerely appreciate everybody taking a risk on me as a new author. So I really try to get back to everybody. But if things continue on this trajectory, I think it's going to be more difficult going
Definitely.
forward. But I'll never forget it. That's for sure. I'll never forget. I'll never be take that for granted. But yeah, it's go go go. But I feel very fortunate, of course, that these novels are resonating with people, and it is crazy to I guess to think that something that I thought about for so long is coming to fruition, and people are reading these books in the same way that like David Morrell who created Rambo. He's a dear friend now. He's just
That's
incredible.
great.
And he did a Twitter thing last night, and I reposted it, of course. And he took a quote from an interview that I had recently, and I talked about him, and he put it in there. And his book Brotherhood of the Rose was very impactful to me, both inspiring me to become a writer and also to continue on my path into the SEAL teams. And I read that back in seventh grade or something.
Yeah.
And I have a first edition signed copy, which is so cool. But I have my original one too. I have my original little
Oh
paperback
wow.
that I read back
That's
in the
great.
day. All the pages are all yellow and everything. But yeah, he wrote this, he quoted me in there, and then he posted it and had the Brother of the Rose book in there, which is super incredible. But I reposted it and I said, hey, authors, your work may be more impactful and significant than you even realize.
Mm. Yeah.
And because it can, like that book, like David had no idea that it was inspiring a sixth grade kid to continue on a path into the SEAL teams and continue on this path of the dream he had since he was 7, and then also realize, oh, this book is so amazing. I'm going to write books like this one day.
Yeah.
I'm aspiring to do the same thing, to give other people the same magic that I'm getting reading this right now. So yeah, it is. You can. I mean, yeah, it's humbling.
So let's talk about the terminal list a little bit. So you got Chris Pratt, playing a lead character, playing James Reese,
Yes.
and I know I've seen other interviews where you said you wanted Chris Pratt to be your guy, and oftentimes you thought about him as you're writing the character. But
Yeah.
this is back before he was like,
Yeah.
Avengers and all that kind of stuff. So,
Crazy.
what's it? How did that? I guess I'm trying to think about how did that happen. Like, did you go
Yeah.
to somebody and say it's got to be Chris, it's got to be him, or did you just kind of throw it out there and they said, oh yeah, we'll see what we can do?
No, just myself. So I started writing this in December of 2014, I think. So put the initial one-page executive summary down about then and started writing. It's being a child of the 80s. It is next to impossible not to think of someone playing your protagonist.
Sure.
But it's the key is not thinking of your protagonist as someone.
Hmm.
It's thinking of someone playing your protagonist. Those are two distinctly different things. And so I thought, hey, who could tackle this? Who's the guy right now that could do this? And at the time, he'd been Andy on Parks and Rec. He had a very small role in Zero Dark 30,
Yeah.
where he played a SEAL, which was awesome. And I think I'd read like a magazine article about him somewhere, kind of like an up and comer type person. And I thought, Chris is the guy. Like this is the guy. He has not done something like this before, and that's what I wanted. And I wanted somebody that needed to take a risk also, because I was taking a risk as an author. I wanted somebody along that journey that also needed to take a risk, but I wanted someone that was likable. And I thought Chris is likable. Like people want to sit down and have a beer with that guy. People
Yep.
want to sit down and have a coffee with that guy. People just want to hang out with that guy. And I thought, okay, this is important to have someone who's likable, because my character is likable, although he does some very bad things. In that he can come back, he can flip that switch, and he can get the business done. And that's what I like. That's Chris Pratt. And so that's about all the thought that I gave to it.
Yeah.
But there was never anybody else. I definitely didn't want somebody that has done that sort of thing before.
Yeah.
I'm just playing like another tough guy character just in a new adaptation. This one just happens to be called The Terminal List. No, I wanted Chris to. I mean, Chris was going to be James Reese.
Man.
And then I wanted Antoine to direct. Like I thought I'd directors, and because I love Shooter, which adapted from Point of Impact, and I just love what Antoine has done with Training Day and Equalizer and Magnificent Seven, and And I was like, okay, Antoine's the guy. And I think I had read maybe that they were going to do Magnificent Seven, or maybe that came later. I can't remember. But regardless, those are the two guys that I thought of. And then lo and behold, right before the book comes out, a buddy calls me from the SEAL teams and he says, "Hey, I always wanted to thank you for what you did for me and the teams." I hadn't talked to him about 5 years, and Jared Shaw is his name, and and I couldn't really remember. And he's like, "Hey, you sat me down in your office. You talked to me about transition. You introduced me to people in the private sector, and nobody else took the time to do anything like that for me. And I sincerely appreciate it." And I was like, "Bro, no problem. How's it going?" And he says, "Well, I heard you have a book coming out." And I said, "Yeah, it's coming out in a few months. I have this galley copy, which is like a rough draft. I can send it to you." And he said, "That'd be great, but I'd like to give one to a friend of mine." And I was like, "Yeah, who's that?" And he said, "Chris Pratt." So that's how Chris
And did
Pratt
he
got it.
know? Did he know that Chris was kind of like in that idea of?
No, I hadn't talked to him in
Yep.
5 years.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah, he had no idea
that's
about
wild.
anything. And I was like, dude, I thought of Chris playing this role the entire time I was writing it,
Yeah,
and now you're calling me and telling me that you're going to give one to him.
yeah,
And so he gave it to Chris and said, "Hey," well, first he read it to make sure it wasn't complete garbage,
yeah,
and
yeah.
then he gave it to Chris and
That's
said, "Hey, here's your next project." And then Chris read it. We have a timestamp photo of it, so he read it on a plane in December 28th, I think, of 2017, and then he called the next week and wanted to option it. So crazy, crazy.
that's crazy. That is crazy. All right, so really quick here, I wanted to talk about as we're kind of wrapping up, just advice to new writers and things like that. One of the things a piece of advice that I got from Andy Weir, he's the author of The Martian. He said, uh,
By the way, I
"If
have not read that book. It's
oh, you
been
haven't
on
read it?
my
Oh yeah,
pile for a
that's
long time.
fantastic.
But that movie, oh my
Oh, so
gosh,
good.
that movie was so good.
Yeah,
I love that movie,
yeah,
and that's what's so great about film is that it draws people towards the book. Because I'm so busy all the time, like a lot of people are juggling kids. We're
sure.
juggling all these things, and you have these authors that maybe you read when you didn't have kids, and you weren't running kids all over the place, and didn't have two jobs and relationships and all that sort of thing. And so you stick with those. So when you have like a movie comes out or it pops up on Netflix or Amazon Prime or something like that, and you're like, oh, look at that, that looks pretty cool, and you watch it and you're blown away by it, then
Yeah.
it leads you to the book. So it's so cool to
It's the
see
first
things
movie I
that
think I've seen that I thought that lives up to the book.
nice.
It was really really well done, and the book is
Awesome.
fantastic. So that the whole character of I forget the protagonist's name, but anyhow, it's just fantastic.
God damn it.
Yeah, yeah, there you go. One of the things that he said was an author shouldn't tell other people shouldn't talk about the book. Shouldn't say, okay, well, I've got this new chapter coming up, and here's what I think the character's going to do, and I'm really excited about this new thing, because he said that takes away from that sort of impetus to like, no, I just need to get this out. I'm going to get it out on the page instead of with other people. What do you think about that advice? And do you tend to, I mean, like, are there people who you kind of spitball ideas off of, or you just kind of keep that in your own wheelhouse?
Yeah, I never thought of it in those terms, but yeah, no, I don't talk to anybody about it and spitball with anybody about, hey, I'm thinking about this for a chapter, or what do you think? Like, no, I never really considered doing that. Maybe I might mention something to my wife if she asks me like what I'm working on, or why I'm running down to the gun store to grab a fully automatic AK that you can rent down there, so I can go through the function check and figure it out and get how it sounds, how it feels, right, that sort of thing. So I'll mention it like if it's pertinent, but otherwise it's just internal, and I'm thinking and I'm solving problems, and just like the protagonist is, and just like we all are in life. So yeah, no, I don't do that until it's done, and then I have a group of 4 trusted people that I send it off to, and then they read it and give me some feedback.
Solid.
But a lot of it's like, I mean, up to this point has been very minor stuff, but great, because when you tweak a minor thing, it makes a huge difference. So
Mm.
that's very very valuable. So and then I send it off to my publisher from there, to my actual editor, who then reads it, and also she's gotten back very few edits. And I thought when I first got the novel to Simon and Schuster that there would be a ton of changes because it's Simon and Schuster.
Yeah.
And I thought, hey, if this thing comes back with I don't know, aliens from outer space coming down, robots, that's what's going in. I'm trusting Emily
You trust
Bessler and
those
Simon
guys, yeah.
Schuster. Like, she's amazing. Vince Flynn's editor, Brad Thor's editor, Kyle Mills now, who writes the Vince Flynn Mitrap series. Hey, she's incredible. And it came back with like three things, and she was like, "Hey, would he say this here, or would he really think this here?" And then a third one that I don't even remember, and
Yeah.
that was it. That was it. And then I went to copy editors, and that's grammar,
Line by
spelling,
line.
punctuation
Yeah.
type thing,
Yeah.
but it's not content. So yeah, and all of them have been that way thus far. So yeah, and I think that's because of some advice I got from Stephen Pressfield when I heard him on Rogan, and I misinterpreted him. I thought that he wrote a one-word theme and then put it on his computer or
Yeah.
his typewriter. And so I did that. I wrote revenge, even though the theme of the first novel is really revenge without constraint, and the without constraint part was the key. But I wrote revenge down right here. Second one, I put redemption right here on my computer on a yellow sticky. And then now Stephen Pressfield and I are friends. Of course, he wrote Legend of Bagger Vance, Gates of Fire, Afghan Campaign, Tides of War, a series of books on creativity. One's called War of Art, Turning Pro, Do the Work, Authentic Swing. Fantastic guy. And now that we're friends, he's like, "Hey, that's not what I said." He's like, "I was telling a story about a playwright who would take a sentence and encapsulate the theme of his play in that sentence and put it on his typewriter." And I was like, "Well, I'm so glad I misinterpreted what you said, because it certainly helped guide." And I think having that right there just visually helped me keep the story on track, so that when it got to Emily Bessler at Simon & Schuster, it was on theme. There wasn't a lot out there for her to tweak, because either directly or indirectly, everything led back to that theme of revenge. So I think
Yeah.
that's important to stay on theme for a novel, and you can switch it up in different novels, for me anyway. But I like to stay on theme and really explore one thing in a deep, thoughtful way throughout each of the novels.
That's solid. That's really solid. So you mentioned that you outline your books for the most part, before you start working on them. How much does the characters themselves influence the direction of the book versus, no, I'm sticking to the outline? Because the characters, they sort of come alive, and there's unconscious things that they just sort of
Mhm.
do. Um, you
Yeah.
know, how much do you deviate from the outline?
Yeah, so I like having that outline. So I start with a one-page executive summary, kind of like what you'd find on a book flap, to kind of like, "Hey, is this something I want to explore? Is this something that I want to?" And David Morrell has great advice for authors. He said, "Write yourself a letter on before you start a project on why it's worth the next year of your life.
Wow.
And if you
Yeah.
read that letter and it's worth it, get after it. And if not, maybe another project. But write yourself a letter on it. So I do that in the sense that I write this one-page executive summary. Maybe it's 2 paragraphs, something like that. But it's not super long. It's book jacket type length, maybe a little bit longer. And then I take that and I say, "Oh, this does sound interesting. This sounds fun. I'm really excited about getting to work on this." And then I turn that into the outline. And the outline, I like having beginning, middle, and title, because I'm not wasting bandwidth worried about where's this going to go, or
Hmm.
what's the title going to be, that sort of thing. No bandwidth is wasted on that. It's all focused on the story.
Yeah.
So I like that. And I also have a list of characters. I'll put a list of characters, but I'll have like their name, and then director of the CIA, name, president, like that sort of thing. I don't have personalities attached to them. Mostly it's just for spelling and to make sure that nothing sounds too similar to another character, that sort of a thing. But I get to know those characters as I write the dialogue,
Yep.
as they interact with other characters. I don't necessarily know their personalities going in, unless they're a recurring character like my main character. But new characters don't quite know them yet, and so that will impact the direction of the story, the details of the story. But for the most part, and when I do that outline, I also don't get stuck. That's the important
Mm.
part. Also,
Yeah.
if you are doing an outline and you get to a point where you're like, I don't know how he's going to resolve this. Well, if I get to that, guess what? I keep going forward, just keep crushing, move around it, go over it, blow it up, go through it, whatever it is, because you know what? In a year, I'm going to figure that out. Like
Yep.
I'm going to figure that. Just like on the battlefield, changing environment, enemy adapting. Guess what? I'm solving problems aggressively there. I can do it on the written page too. Just because I get to an outline point where I'm like, I'm not really sure what's going to happen after this chapter. Well, I don't spend a day thinking about that. I don't spend 2 days thinking about that. I don't spend a minute thinking about that.
Mm.
Well, maybe a minute, but then I go and I
Yeah.
move on to the next one, because as I write, then I will figure that out. And as I write, then I'll update that outline actually. So I have a visual representation of how things look, how it's going, how it's flowing. And I do that until I get to about like the 75% mark. And then it becomes just too hard to continue to, there's too much has developed to make that an efficient tool. So I get about 75% point, I'm good from there. And I just keep going. Then it all becomes the narrative and not the outline.
Man, that's solid advice for anybody working on any kind of project. Honestly, is to have kind of begin with the end in mind and sort of map out how you're going to get there, and
Yeah,
then
people do it differently though. Some people they call them pantsers, so they're writing by the seat of their pants.
yeah,
So I have some elements of that as I write, those parts that I haven't figured out,
sure,
and then some of the background, some of the research, that sort of thing. The personalities, obviously, the characters. Sometimes one character sometimes becomes two, and
hmm.
because it seems that, and then sometimes two characters become one. So that happens as well as I write. But once again, these aren't things that slow me down. They're just natural part of telling the story. But other people don't do that. Other people just start writing
They
and don't
start
have an
writing and
outline.
go
They
and
just
make it
kind of
work out.
have an idea and then they just go.
Yeah.
And for some people that's effective. So for me, I liked having that outline though.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. All right. Well, there's a lot of other questions I could ask, but we don't have time. So I'm going to leave it here. Look, I just want to say congratulations on all the success. I love reading the books, and I can't wait for the terminal list to come out and just see you do more cool stuff out there, man.
Uh,
So well done.
well, I sincerely appreciate that, and I'm going to work on my beard between now and our next conversation. But yeah, man, congratulations on everything you have going on. I can't wait to check out those other projects you have, and
Thank you.
looking forward to talking to you again at some point.
All right. Thanks, Jack. Appreciate it.
Take care.